Okay, so flower communion. Across religious traditions, food is a common feature. Whether it is in a formal worship service or an informal community gathering, the breaking of bread is a truly multi-faith experience. As many of us heard and experienced last month at our interfaith iftar dinner, the breaking of fast during Ramadan is often a communal experience where people come together with gratitude and with purpose. And the Jewish feast of the Passover Seder, one on which the ritual plate includes specific items that commemorate different parts of the Passover story, that helps connect an ancient story to the realities and experiences that we have in today's world. And within Unitarian Universalism, we have our ever-present ritual of coffee hour, where fellowship that is named in worship is made real over caffeine and youth-supplied donuts. And of course, one of my favorites are community potlucks, where people come together with food representing their tastes and experiences, where a community brings more food, enough that is more for than just themselves, where our shared food tells a story, and our shared time builds a more appreciative and loving community. In these and many more ways, food, glorious food, and the act of sharing it amongst one another, it is truly made sacred. And this past week in Denver, I got to witness how sharing meals together helped myself and others to literally grow our sacred community. As one of the co-facilitators for the UUA's Thrive Leadership School for Youth of Color, I had the privilege and joy of being in community with nearly a dozen Unitarian Universalist youth of color who were there for spiritual and leadership development. For 5 days, we all worshiped together. We had deep conversations on race, racism, and gender identity, and we all shared meals together. And it was in one of those meals that our community, it was often in those meals that our community grew. Every day during lunch and dinner, someone new would show up at our table. It might have been a member of the Denver church that was hosting us, a local organizer or activist, or another youth from the area, all of whom would join us as our community blessed and shared our meal. Regardless of how much food we had or how behind schedule we got, and we did get behind schedule, we always welcomed these new faces at the table. And I remember one particular evening when we had 3 new people join us for dinner. As we set up our usual 3 folding tables and 14 chairs, one of the co-facilitators pointed out that we needed to find room for 3 more chairs. Without hesitation, all of the youth responded, "Let's just go get another table." So 2 youth went down to the storage room, grabbed another folding table, and put it next to the others we had been using. In their determination to welcome newcomers to our community, they had literally built a bigger table. And they knew that we could. And the table building that week, it did not just end with the literal construction of plastic tables. As part of our time together, we were able to experience what it looks like to build bigger figurative tables in our efforts for social justice and transformation. While we were in Denver, the local Black Lives Matter chapter was holding an action in Denver's Civic Center Park near the Capitol building. For 135 hours, marking the 135 Black lives that had been taken by police violence this year alone, they claimed a section of the park as a people of color only space, a healing space where Black Lives Matter activists and their people of color allies could come together and know that they were in safe community. And what made this space a bigger table was the way in which it prioritized certain voices. In an effort to lift up intersectionality, the leaders of this space regularly made explicit statements that they wanted to prioritize the voices and stories of women of transgender people, and of non-binary people. Anytime the space was opened up for group reflection or sharing, cisgender men were reminded time and time again to not speechify and to let the voices of people in the margins of the margins take the center. In setting those expectations within the community, the organizers of the Black Lives Matter healing space, they demonstrated an essential part to building a bigger table. To build that bigger table, we need to listen to the voices beyond the ones that have already been sitting at it, beyond the people and voices who have traditionally been at the center. To build a bigger table, we need to listen to the voices that have traditionally not been part of the conversation, whose voices and experiences have been invisibilized or taken for granted. In centering the experiences of women and transgender Black people, lives that experience multiple marginalizations and know greater depths of oppression, that healing space was showing us what we needed to do to build that more inclusive table. We need to let the voices of those long excluded people be the ones that lead. We need to feature their experiences at the table, feature their visions for community and change. We need to listen to and follow those voices, because with those greater depths of oppression that they encounter comes a more inclusive understanding of what universal and collective liberation entails. And here, in this community, there are experiences within our walls that we can turn to in our work to build a bigger table. There are voices that we can strive to center so that we can more fully live into that universalist vision of an inclusive community. Among the voices that I have found myself learning to center, and I am very much still learning, are the voices and the experiences of people who have encountered ableism within and beyond our community. Ableism, broadly defined as attitudes, practices, and systems that devalue people who live with what we may call physical, psychiatric, or emotional disabilities. Ableism is an established norm in our society. Like racism and heterosexism, ableism is another way in which our society's table has left certain people out. It has failed to acknowledge their presence, their value, and their contributions. And like the list of isms that impact our world, our culture of ableism can cause us to ignore what we may not personally experience or see. See, oftentimes when we think of disabilities and access, our minds may go to wheelchairs, to walking sticks and ramps, to the visible signs that seem obvious. We, and again, I very much include myself in that we, do not understand the breadth of disabilities that exist in our world, because we have not been trained to do so. Instead, we are often trained to ignore the different ways of being in the world, trained to see certain bodies and certain experiences as normal. We are trained to think of those other experiences as exceptions, not an example of what it means to be a person of worth. Certain bodies, certain stories and abilities, they are privileged. And anything outside of that exclusive norm is said to be more of a burden than a reality. Anything outside of that exclusive norm is said to be more of an individual need and not a social responsibility. As Rory Judah Blank, a disability rights advocate in Portland, writes, U.S. language around disability centers the individual. We say a person has a disability. Disability rights activists in the UK, however, frame it differently. They recognize that people with disabilities are not disabled by impairments. We are disabled by the built environment and a capitalist society that excludes and exploits some while enabling others. Their words are a reminder that to counter ableism, we not only need to adjust our physical environment, we need to adjust how we think about it and the people within it. And again, within our community around ableism, there are some things that we do well as a community. We do have more accessible restrooms, and we have mechanisms to ensure that individuals who need hearing assistance can actually listen to our services. And we have a religious education program that normalizes the experience and capacities of every child and youth. But in our efforts to create a table where all are known and welcome, we can still do more. And indeed, we are trying to do more. In our sanctuary, our Sunday table, we are working to establish a fragrance-free zone so that those with fragrance sensitivities and allergies can, in fact, stay in our space. In our conversations, we can learn to better understand the experiences and realities that are not our own, without comparing them to our lives, and without requiring anyone to prove that they have an experience of a disability like chronic pain, fragrance sensitivity, or cognitive difference. We can continue, just like this morning, where we do have a lift, but maybe some more of us need to learn how to use it. It's funny, and at the same time, we can learn. Here in this community, we do have voices at our table that can and want to help us expand what we build as inclusive. People that are asking us to build with them a bigger, more accessible table. People in our community and people beyond our community who are reminding us that their stories and experiences, too long and too often ignored, need to be centered and followed. And so my decision this morning to call attention to this place where our table can grow, it's not meant to be a criticism or a lecture. I know full well that this community's heart is one that holds a deep desire to ensure that all are welcome, that all are affirmed in their worth and in their power. And to live up to that desire, we must continuously evolve and move our world to do the same. Every community, including this one, goes through cycles of building and rebuilding our shared table as we come to realize the breadth of voices and experiences that are present within it. Every community has the potential to grow in its understanding and celebration of various identities, but only if we are willing to acknowledge the experiences that our privileges and our norms have let us ignore, or have even let us label as less valuable, less capable of contributing to building our beloved community. Our community, one that is rooted in those values of radical inclusivity and loving transformation, can help lead the way in that growth. If we are willing to center the voices countering ableism, we can create a new model, a new cycle of beloved and more inclusive community. If we are willing to let those voices lead, we can be a community where every experience is not only welcomed at the table, but welcomed to be a part of saying how we should be building it. As I thought about this topic today, a song that we have heard and sung in the sanctuary multiple times came through my mind. Some of you may know it. Draw the circle.
Draw the circle wide.
Draw the circle wide. Well, there's one particular line that I think captures the heart and mission of our faith and of our loving, ever-expanding community. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. As a faith community, we already draw a pretty wide circle that welcomes a variety of beliefs and identities. Some of us have found a home here that we would not be able to find anywhere else. And we can always make it bigger. As a community that upholds that constant search for truth, that constant journey of growth, we also strive to draw that wider circle. As we continue to learn from experiences different from our own, we can always find new ways of drawing our circle wider and making our table bigger. We can come up with new ways to make this place a spiritual home and prophetic presence for all. And to do so, we have to listen to those experiences of people who have not always been welcomed at the table. We have to center their stories and their tools to make certain that our circle is drawn wide enough, that our table is made big enough for all. And building together that more inclusive table, drawing that circle wider still, that is what we must do if our world and all of its inhabitants can thrive. In our time for all ages, we saw two ways of sitting at the table, each with their own results. In one of those settings, people ignored each other's presence and the tools that they brought to the table. They only thought about feeding their individual selves, and they all went hungry. But in that second setting, the people recognized everybody else who was sitting at the table, recognized that each person had tools to help sustain others, ways to make sure that nobody was left unfed. Every person that comes to the table has their tools to ensure that all are nourished. Every person that comes to our table has a responsibility to use the tools we have to ensure that everybody is welcomed and fed. It is in our heritage and it is in our hearts as Unitarian Universalists to know that whenever somebody new comes to the table, they have something to offer to help us build it a little differently. Every time someone new comes to the table, they bring tools to make sure experiences are acknowledged and more people are fed. And if we are willing to center and listen to what those long ignored voices have to say, they can help us live up to that radically inclusive community and world that we strive to create together. So this morning, I started out pointing out the different ways in which food has been a part of religious communities and worship. And so today we are going to use food to practice another way that it can be used to help us build a bigger table. Here in front of us are all of your contributions to our flower communion, your contributions to our shared table. Here in front of us are the rich diversity of ways that we see the word F-L-O-U-R, flower. Today, we have built our table together, and with all that we have brought, we are going to feed each other. And I don't mean that literally. Don't worry, we don't have long spoons that you're going to try to feed each other with. It's not part of the process. But in coming up and taking something from our shared table, we can embrace the reality that what is feeding us is something that was brought by somebody else in this community. We can embrace the tools and the visions that each of us brings to our community. So as we come up, or as we help one another be fed, I invite us to embrace the joyful noise and that unmappable messiness that building our bigger table involves. And again, I don't mean this with a literal mess of crumbs and food on the floor, since we don't want to create any more mess for our hardworking facilities manager. But I mean a figurative mess, one where we don't quite know what we're doing, where we don't quite know the most efficient way to come up to our new table and feed one another, where we don't have a roadmap or directions or ushers telling us to come up row by row. We're learning together, and it may be messy. It probably will be messy. It may be awkward and a little uncomfortable, but hopefully it'll be fun. Hopefully. And if we are willing to dive into the messiness of this moment, willing to learn together and from one another, we can build ourselves a bigger table, knowing that we are all coming to and building it together. And so I invite you all to create that messiness in this moment right now and come up and take from our flower communion table.